Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first live webinar. I'm Mike Weissman, and for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through some of the introductory lessons. We're going to talk a little bit about why it is we all love sugar so much. And, oh, there we go. We're going to talk about why we love sugar so much, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we got the situation in this country where we are eating just so much sugar. So, quickly, let's look at our goal for the next 21 days. Our first goal is going to be to learn about how sugar affects our bodies, our health, and our well-being. We're going to understand how we all got into this situation. And we're going to learn how we can take back control of what we put into our bodies. And finally, we're going to develop new habits to support a healthy lifestyle. This is going to happen step by step over the next 21 days. Those of you that started on Monday are already on day 3. There's a few people that came in a little bit later. Some people even came in as late as early this morning. So you're a couple or a few days behind, but that's okay. You'll get the emails. They'll come out every day, every morning around 7 o'clock in the morning. And that'll be a daily lesson typically with information, sometimes links, sometimes some videos. So let's get started. And one point I want to make before we go is that 21 days is just a start. Okay, I think that's a really, really important point in that detoxes really don't work. I think it's sort of funny for me to say that, but they really don't work except when they do. And when they do is when you use them to catapult yourself, to basically kickstart yourself into a healthy living lifestyle, a healthy diet, healthy eating. So really use this 21-day detox to get started. Think of it as getting started, as a kickstarting your lifelong journey into good health. Okay, so that would make that point. Great. So we all love sugar. That's the fact. And I see in the forum a lot of people are posting that, I'm a sugar addict, sugar is my nemesis, sugar is my downfall, I'm so addicted to sugar. And yeah, it's true. But the point I want to make here is that it's not your fault. Being addicted to sugar is not a personal, or it's not a comment on your character. Okay, we are hardwired in our DNA. It's genetic for us to love sugar. Okay, and there's several reasons for it. First of all, sweet is the only taste we crave from birth. Okay, mother's milk is very, very sweet. But it's very sweet with different kinds of sugars, very complex forms of sugars, not the typical sugars you'd find in, on table sugar. It's sugars that actually nourish our gut and create the gut bacteria that newborn babies need to have and give all kinds of extra nutrients. But it is very, very sweet, and we're born craving it. Okay. Secondly, or thirdly, in the wild, toxic plants were generally bitter, whereas edibles were sweet. So if you're out in the wild and you're hunting and foraging, generally when you found something that was sweet, it was okay, it was good for you. Something bitter, not so much, not all the time. So that was also, it's a survival instinct. It's hardwired into us. We love sweet. And lastly, and this is not so much in our DNA, in our programming, but what's been going on around us, really since the dawn of agriculture, and even probably before that, humans have sought out sweet. Okay, because we like it so much. But since the agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago, when we started to cultivate fruits and vegetables, there's been a constant progression to grow sweeter and sweeter fruits and vegetables by breeding, crossbreeding, breeding the sweetest varieties with the sweetest varieties. And over the years, the fruit and vegetables that we have today has a much higher sugar content than it had, let's say, certainly 10,000 years ago, but even 100 or even 50 years ago. Even in the last 20 years, there are new strains of fruits in the citrus family, apples, across the board, corn, that is much, much sweeter than even your grandparents remember it being. So we're all sort of in this constant current of sweetness. We're surrounded by it. It's in our lives. So I think it's a really important takeaway point that it's okay to sort of feel that you're stuck on sugar. We all are. It's a survival mechanism, and we're hardwired that way. Okay? We are all born with a sweet tooth. Okay? I think there's two types of people in the world. Those who admit they have a sweet tooth, and those that will lie about it. So let's take a look now. Let's go back and do a little bit of a history lesson here. Sugar basically occurs naturally in nature, but not in concentrated amounts. Okay, and so that's sort of like the first problem, because if we think about things like honey, maple syrup, actual sugarcane plants, and if anybody's ever seen or actually been able to have a piece of sugarcane, it's a very dense, very solid stem that the sugar is embedded into. You got to chew on it like crazy to get the sugar out. It doesn't just like, you don't stick like a tap in, the sugar comes out of sugarcane. It's a tremendously complicated and long process to get the sugar out of it. And it's really in the last 200 or so years we've been able to do that on a large scale. Okay? Sugar was scarce and expensive. And really this chart that's in the background of this slide is showing you the increase in sugar consumption going from 1820 till the present day. And we can see back in 1820, we're just starting off at really a few pounds per year per person. And now, fast forward a couple hundred years, we're up to like 100 pounds per person per year. That's in the span of just a 200-year period. Okay? We are just not equipped to deal with that much sugar, that much increase in such a short amount of time. And that's really where a lot of the problem is coming from. So let's take a look about how that came about and how we got there. Okay? Remember, sugar was hard to come by, just like our friend Winnie the Pooh here, right? You had to work for it. Okay, so here it is. Now, they know that we love it. So when I speak of they, it's that big sort of, disembodied they, that's essentially the food manufacturers. Now, these aren't people that are, there's no conspiracy theory going on here, but we're basically talking about business and industry that wants us to buy their products. It's a reasonable objective for a company to want to make money. And if you're in the food business, there's ways to do it. So food manufacturers has figured out pretty early on that if you add sugar to almost anything equals more sales. Okay? Food makers, in fact, call this, that perfect combo of sugar, salt, and fat, the bliss point. And there's food scientists that earn millions of dollars a year perfecting the bliss point. In fact, we'll have a video. It's actually on our website right now. There'll be a link posted. You've actually seen the links come up from time to time. It's strongerleaneryou.com/learn, where we have a bunch of videos. There's a video from someone that actually calls himself Dr. Bliss. His name is Dr. Moskovich. And he gets paid millions of dollars by companies to consult with them and find that bliss point. Okay? And they are literally hijacking our taste buds. A couple people asked in the forum earlier in the week about some products, and a lot of these products have what's called natural flavorings included into it. I don't want to get too far off topic, I want to stick on the point, but realize natural flavorings simply means that the flavor was once extracted from the natural ingredient. For example, something flavored cherry, or the one on the forum was a maple syrup flavored product, an oatmeal. So that means that at one point, maple syrup was sampled chemically, and then they enhanced it in the lab, and they can still legally call it natural flavorings. However, that tastes much more mapley than you'll ever find in nature. The same thing with any of these orange flavored drinks or cherry flavored drinks or fruit flavored drinks. The flavor is super enhanced and it really goes to our taste buds, and we want more of it. We want more of it. So they are messing with our taste buds. Okay, they're creating an addiction for food. And the big corporations spend billions of dollars in marketing to us and our children. Okay, which is really unbelievable when you think about how much they spend on marketing to kids. And even in the EU right now, there's a lot of legislation in Europe to actually limit marketing of junk food to children. Okay, and bottom line is, they know what we love. They know how to make it. They know what we want to, what stimulates our taste buds and makes us want to spend money. And bottom line is, we don't stand a chance. Okay, and here's an ad I clipped from probably looks like the 1950s maybe, and what were we thinking, right? And it's unbelievable that the headline here says why we have the youngest customers in the business. This is 7-Up bragging about having the youngest customers in the business with a baby drinking out of a 7-Up bottle. So, and the ironic thing now is today, type 2 diabetes is no longer called adult onset diabetes. It's actually been taken out of the nomenclature. It's only called type 2 diabetes. It used to be called adult onset diabetes. No more. It's type 2 diabetes. Okay. So this is a question that's come up a lot in our Facebook group, and it's a great question, and we've answered it a couple times on one-on-one, but I want to address it now because the big question is how much sugar is okay. So we're going to speak in terms of this 21-day detox. How much sugar should we be eating? Well, the World Health Organization recommends that men consume 9 teaspoons per day, women 6 teaspoons per day, and children 3 to 6 teaspoons per day. So we think that 6 to 9 teaspoons a day is a good starting point. So the question has been asked, is that added sugar or is that sugar that's naturally contained, let's say in fruits or bananas or oranges, or what is it? How do you calculate this? Dairy products, things like that. So when I was on the radio a couple weeks ago on 104.9, Catherine asked me this question, it's added sugar. And I sort of said, well, it is, but it's a complicated question because let's say you're having, become a fruitarian and you're going to have, a pound of grapes in one sitting or 4 or 5 oranges in a day. Well, you're adding sugar. You're adding it as in its natural form, contained in a fruit. But still, that's added sugar. So yeah, really what we're looking for is the 6 to 9 teaspoons a day of total sugar consumption. Okay, that would be fructose and sucrose. We're going to talk more about this in a later lecture series. But right now, when you look at a label and you see the number of grams, remember there's 4 grams per teaspoon. Remember from our first lesson, there's 4 grams in a teaspoon. So we're talking 24 to 36 grams of sugar per day. So let's round it up to 40. We want to stay under 40 grams of sugar per day. If we can do that, with everything, including the fruit, including our beverages, including, basically our dairy, then we're going to be doing really, really well. And we're going to be on target. Okay, so I hope that sort of clarifies that point. Okay, and again, if anybody has questions, go ahead, type them on there, and Karen will throw them over to me, and probably save them up, and we'll answer them at the end. Okay. So let's talk a little bit specifically about added sugar versus natural sugar. Okay, so the bottom line is it all counts. It all counts. Like I just said in the previous slide, you can basically overdose on fruit, or just mega dose on fruit, and you'll be getting in too much sugar. So it all counts. Now, fruit is okay as long as it's not blended or overdone. Okay, it is possible to eat too much sugar. Yes, you can eat too much fruit. This little graphic here of the blender going crazy over there is reminiscent back about 10 years ago in my case, where I was essentially pre-diabetic, running with very high fasting high blood glucose levels. And I was pretty much off all added sugar and off most carbohydrates, but I still had this fasting high sugar levels, and a lot of it was from eating fruit smoothies. And, not super loaded ones, an apple and half a banana, protein powder, maybe some blueberries. We thought we were doing the healthy right thing, but I was still keeping my sugar levels really, really high. So it's not the same for everybody, because in some people, they're more sensitive to carbohydrates and have a certain insulin resistance, which I have, and therefore I have to watch it more than some other people. Some people can eat what I was eating, and it wouldn't really move the scale of their fasting blood sugar. For me, it was. About a third of the population in this country, most studies show, does have a sensitivity to carbohydrates and sugar specifically, and also an insulin resistance. Okay, we're going to go more into that later on. Now, bananas, grapes, mangoes, and pineapples, those are the highest sugar fruits. So those are the ones you want to eat in lesser quantities. Okay? Berries are the lowest sugar fruit. So if you have a choice of fruit, go for the berries. You can eat more of them. They're more filling. There's a lot of nutrients in them. Now, all these fruits have nutrients. They all have vitamins. So we're not restricting fruit per se on the 21-day sugar detox. But we want to be conscientious of how much of it we are eating, and we're not overdoing it. Okay, so now we're going to go back into a little bit of a history lesson here, and we've answered the questions basically why we like sugar so much, and the problems that the agricultural revolution, so to speak, has had, making everything sweeter, and we're just being inundated with sugar. But let's look a little bit and spend a few minutes understanding how we came to this scenario, that there's so much sugar, that slide that we saw previously went from just a couple of pounds in 1820 to 100 plus pounds in 2013, 2015. So let's talk about how that happened. I call it the perfect storm, and it's a lot of factors coming together. It's a confluence of factors. And let's look at them one by one, go through them rather quickly, and this is extracted from a much longer lecture that I have given. But let's just touch some of the high points here. Okay. So first off, in the 1950s, President Eisenhower suffers a heart attack, and he's really one of the first public figures in the United States to go through heart disease, and he publicizes heart disease, and it makes it onto the front page of all the newspapers. Ike suffers a heart attack. He'd go on to have several heart attacks after that. And it really shook people up, because in the 1950s, the United States, predominantly middle-aged men and aging men were dying of heart attacks, and coronary heart disease was on the rise. And the United States government and medical associations wants to find a cure. They want to find out why. They want to solve this problem. So they turn to the scientists of the day. Okay? And the 1950s to the 1970s, there's a tension that's going on between several scientists. Okay? On the left of your screen there, you have a picture of Ancel Keys, and to his right is a guy named John Yudkin. Now, Ancel Keys is in the United States, and he's a prominent scientist in the United States. He became very famous in his work for the U.S. Army, coming up with what's called the K rations, right, to feed the troops, to try to find what is the most effective way to package food and get it out to the front lines, get out to the troops during World War II. So he invents the K rations. And so he's well regarded in the field of really a newly emerging field of food science. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in England is John Yudkin. And John Yudkin, on the other hand, is looking at his research where England has a tremendous problem now, even more so than the United States by that point in time, because they got to sugar earlier than us and developed a much stronger liking for it earlier. Okay? They really established the sugar trade to the Caribbean and whatnot, and really created the whole sugar craze, if you will, that chart that grew everything up from a couple pounds to hundreds of pounds. So England's ahead of us. And Dr. Yudkin is pinning it on sugar. He's doing actual research and studies and showing that when you take away sugar, the coronary heart disease decreases. He shows that the inflammation goes down, that the blood numbers, the cholesterol, the triglycerides all decreases. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, back in the States, is Ancel Keys. Ancel Keys, who is a favorite with big corporations and government, he postulates the theory that it's fat and cholesterol. Okay. Now, admittedly, the science in the 1950s and 60s is a science of 50 years ago. It's not what we have today. So Ancel Keys puts forth this theory, and he does his own research or his own studies. He does more what's called observational studies, and he concludes, no, it's fat and cholesterol. That's why people are dying of heart attacks. And he takes that path, and sure enough, over time, he emerges as a victor in that battle. And it would work out that Yudkin would publish a paper, and then Keys, who was on the payroll, by the way, of the big food companies and the big lobbyists, would publish a paper discrediting Yudkin. And it went back and forth for many, many years. There's a couple of great films that are out there, like That Sugar film, and some other films that detail this whole conflict that went on. You can check those out. There's a link on our website to those. Okay. Next, once the Keys-Yudkin thing is playing out and Keys is winning, then you have this idea called Get Bigger, Get Out by a man named Earl Butz. Earl Butz is the Secretary of Agriculture during the time of Richard Nixon. Up till the 1970s, people might find this surprising, but the price of food was a factor in presidential elections. Today, it's obviously not a factor. No one discusses, I'm going to lower the price of food. Right? Food basically has gotten cheap. It's gotten convenient, it's gotten cheap. But during the times of Nixon and previous to that, the price of wheat, the price of grain, the price of corn was a factor, and people wanted cheaper food. So Nixon set out Earl Butz, and he told Earl Butz to work out a system that food can become cheaper and to remove it from a factor in future presidential elections. And what Earl Butz does is he goes out to the farmers, and he says, get bigger, get out. And what that means is no more small farms. Small farms are inefficient. Okay? He wants big factory farms, not just a couple hundred acres, thousands of acres, 10,000 acres. But there's a problem with that. If you're a 10,000 acre farm and you're growing a crop, okay, in the 1970s, and you don't get rain that year, well, what happens? How do you make money? You could go out of business. You'll go bust in 1 year. So the Department of Agriculture turns back to the farmer and says, don't worry, we'll subsidize you. We'll guarantee you a minimum price. And he creates corn and crop subsidies, particularly corn. And corn becomes very, very cheap to produce. In the same way, if the farmers say, well, wait, what if we have a bumper crop this year? Is supply and demand. A bumper crop, our prices will fall, and again, we won't be able to cover our costs. And again, Butts comes to the rescue, so to speak, and says, no problem, we'll guarantee you a minimum price. We will be your customer. We will buy. And we've all heard of this in the past. The government would stockpile, literally burn wheat or burn corn. There was just too darn much of it in good years. So they heavily subsidized it and buoyed this industry so that corn got ridiculously cheap, and then it bled over into, say, soy and sugar beet production are also in that same category. Okay, now let's go ahead a little bit further into looking at what happens with high fructose corn syrup. This is something that's sort of been demonized, but the fact is high fructose corn syrup is exactly the same as sugar, as table sugar. There's no difference chemically, no difference the way your body sees or reacts to it. They're identical. Okay? But it starts out in 1965 when a Japanese company invents a process to convert glucose syrup, which is corn syrup. Corn syrup is glucose syrup. They invented a process to convert about half the glucose in the corn syrup into fructose. Now that 50% glucose, 50% fructose formulation is about the same as table sugar, what we call sucrose, and it tastes the same. Okay? Now in 1967, the USA figures out the same process. It's basically treating this corn syrup with some pretty toxic chemicals, and they're able to produce the same syrup. Now, in 1970s, world sugar prices begin to rise. A lot of the sugar's coming out of the third world and countries especially in Latin America and Central America, and there's a lot of uprising and upheavals, and they're burning sugar crops and they're trying to disrupt world markets, and sugar gets expensive. I remember being a kid in the 1970s and things with real sugar were expensive. Okay? But in 1976, the USDA grants high fructose corn syrup, it's abbreviated HFCS, what's called GRAS status or designation, which is generally regarded as safe, meaning now it can enter our food supply. So in 1976, high fructose corn syrup enters our food supply, and food manufacturers love it. It tastes like sugar. It's exactly almost the same chemical composition. In fact, you can buy it a little bit sweeter or a little bit less sweet. You can play with the sweetness very easily. It's a liquid form. It's cheaper and easier to use. It goes into soft drinks very, very well. So it gets in everything. Now, let's jump ahead to late 1970s. Late 1970s, George McGovern, Senator McGovern, he convenes the famous committee to head up a committee to establish U.S. nutritional guidelines. Up until then, 1977, there were no nutritional guidelines in the United States. There was no food pyramid. No one was telling us what to eat. You know, no one had to tell our grandparents or great-grandparents what to eat or how to eat healthy. But people were getting sick. Remember, back to Eisenhower, trying to figure it out. Back to the fat cholesterol theory. So everything is sort of going bad when it comes to food and nutrition. The government realizes there's a problem and they want to solve it. So the government turns, surprisingly enough, to Ancel Keys. Remember him from our previous slides, who is the proponent of the fat cholesterol theory. And in fact, they accept his theory, and they base the entire food pyramid on his theory. And the food pyramid says we should increase our carbohydrate consumption up to 60%. Okay? And thus starts what's called the low-fat or Snackwell craze. In the late 1970s, early 80s, food makers now start to make fat-free products, low-fat products, Snackwell cookies. But there's a problem. When you take out the fat, there's nothing left. The flavor is gone. So you have to add back in the sugar. It's sugar and the carbs take its place. And the net result is that we've got fatter and we got sicker. Okay, so you have this progression of people ostensibly trying to do good, trying to eliminate hunger, lower the price of food, and make food cheaper, and they're doing it. Hunger is going away. People are not going to bed hungry in the United States anymore. Food is getting cheap. Fast food is getting even cheaper. But it's coming at a tremendous cost. Okay? To the point that right now, sugar is in 80% of packaged, processed, and prepared food in the supermarket. Okay? Salad dressings, ketchup, soups, frozen veggies, yogurts, chicken and beef meals, even things that you wouldn't expect sugar to be in, usually savory foods, whole wheat bread, pasta sauce, and pizza. Because like we said early on, food makers know what we like, and sugar is more than just a sweetener. It's a flavor enhancer. It makes food taste better. And we saw, and we know that more sugar equals more sales. Okay? So that sort of brings us to the right up to the present day, and sort of lays out the sort of the big problem, the 20,000-foot view, if you will, of how we basically got here. And there's one point I want to make. I want to back up a slide here, 2 slides. At the McGovern report, it's interesting that they set up the committee. The third point there says the committee assigns the USDA to establish the guidelines. Now I don't think anyone's ever questioned that, and truthfully, I never questioned. I never thought about that at all. But think about it. If you're going to set out guidelines for healthy eating, which arm of the government, branch of the government, would you assign it to? Well, would you pick the Department of Health or the Department of Agriculture? Okay, Department of Agriculture is in charge of all the crop subsidies, all the crops, all the meat, the packing industry, and essentially the USDA is all staffed by corporate, ex-corporate lawyers, ex-corporate lobbyists, and even ex-corporate CEOs. Okay, they put the USDA in charge of telling us what we should be eating, as opposed to the Department of Health. Okay, I think that's a sort of like asking the fox to watch the hen house. Okay, and it's paid off because the guidelines are basically rigged at this point to lead us into the crops that we produce in this country in a big way: wheat, soy, and corn. Okay, so let's look ahead now to the next 21 days, and then I'm going to go to a couple questions from the forum, and then we'll see if anybody's asking any questions over on Karen's side there on the live stream. Okay, so the next 21 days, we're going to learn. It used to be 56, now it's 61 names of sugar. Okay, we're going to learn why that is. There's a lot of reasons why there's so many names of sugar. There's different textures, different ways that reacts in food, but also, just as an aside, if you're going to put a lot of sugar in a food and you split it, some of it into fructose and some of it into maltodextrose, for example, it keeps from putting it into one single ingredient, and therefore it pushes it further down the list. Remember, ingredients are listed in the order of by weight on the so if you can split an ingredient into 2 sub-ingredients, it won't show as the first or second ingredient on the list. It might push it down to the 3rd and 5th ingredient. But together, they really belong in the number 1 spot. So there's some tricks to that. But the 61 names of sugar, we've seen that in one of the emails that's already gone out. There's a download. If you haven't got it, text me or message us on the Facebook page and we'll make sure you get it. We're going to learn how to read labels. We've been doing a lot of that already in the forum, and it's great. Keep them coming. Keep posting your labels throughout the 21 days. You're in the supermarket shopping. Even if, you pick something up, you want to check it, take your phone, snap a picture, and send it up to us. We love seeing these labels and busting these labels. Okay? We're going to learn how sugar affects more than just our waistlines. Okay? It affects how we think. It affects our, it affects the inflammation in our body. It affects so much more than just, our waistline and just our weight. Okay, we're going to see an interesting thing about why a calorie is not always a calorie. This is coming up in a lesson on the fairly soon. That calories are not created equal. But the government, not the government, but the food makers, well, the government also does it. They do support this theory that a calorie is a calorie, and if you would just eat less, you'd be okay. We're going to see it's not the case. A calorie is not always a calorie. Okay, we're going to learn about making better breakfast choices. That's coming up real soon in one of your upcoming lessons, so watch out for that. We're going to be sharing sugar-free treats and recipes, and low sugar treats and low sugar recipes, and much, much more. So with this knowledge in hand, there's 21 days ahead of us. I wish everybody great success. You're going to do great. We'll be back again with more videos and lots more information. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and post them now. And if not, we're going to sign off. And I will. This video will be available for replay. So if you want to watch it again, or for those of you that are watching it again, you'll know it's a replay, but it will be available on the forum, on the Facebook group, and on my Facebook page. Everybody have a great night, and we'll see you on the next video.